Hello Internet, let's talk about pressure groups and let's talk specifically about the relationship between pressure groups and democracy. Now, what I'm going to do in this particular presentation is give you the outlines. I'm not going to give you a lot of examples. I'm not going to give you the evidence. We're going to have to talk about the evidence in class and you're going to have to garner it yourself. So as we go through this, be aware that what we're talking about here is the broad outline relationship, the thematic relationship between pressure groups and democracy. You will need to bring the evidence to hang off this particular skeleton. So the key point really is that the main thing is that pressure groups exist to make democracy better. And I think the main way in which they seek to do that is through 5 mechanisms. First of all, they seek to compensate for the tyranny of the majority. They also look to plug the gaps in the democratic process. They're there to inform the debate, to encourage participation, and finally to enhance accountability. Now we're going to go through all of these individually, but again, I'm really just going to be giving you the broad outline. What I want you to do is to come up with the evidence that you're going to use to give substance to this particular argument. So the tyranny of the majority. If you have a democracy and everything is decided by popular vote, then if you have a persistent majority, they may find themselves on the wrong end of a particular decision. Now, think about persistent majorities. You can think about anything. You could think about left-handed people, for example. Left-handed people are subject to the tyranny of the majority. Almost everything that we have is geared around right-handed people, from corkscrews to handwriting to doorknobs to pretty much everything else. So the entire world is geared towards the interests of right-handed people. How then do pressure groups enhance or how then do pressure groups compensate for the tyranny of the majority? Now, I know I said that I was going to be avoiding giving you any particular examples, but here's an interesting one that just came up the other day. And I'm just going to play a clip from a radio program and we'll take it from there. Now, hang on a second. Here we go.
This weekend sees the 20th anniversary of the Disability Discrimination Act. It was seen, of course, as a landmark piece of legislation. It was passed to protect and promote the rights of disabled people. There had been huge protests that led to its introduction. So, 2 decades on, campaigners are wondering the extent to which it's been a success, and many of them saying full equality is still an awful long way off. Our Disability News correspondent, Nikki Fox, has been looking back at how the legislation helped change lives.
Jason Wilshire-Mills is a renowned artist. His work portrays his life as a disabled person. Back in the early 1980s, he was feeling down after a long stay in hospital, so his brother took him in his wheelchair to the pictures to cheer him up.
He said, "I'm going to take you to see Jaws 1 and 2. It was a double billing, so it was really good. We got to the cinema. The manager came out, didn't make any eye contacts, and he kind of pointed at me and said, well, he can't come in. He's a fire hazard."
Jason reflects experiences like this in his work, using his talent to highlight the frustration he felt at the time.
He couldn't complain because there wasn't anything in statute to complain about. It was basically, you put up with it. So this is the banner.
One of his pieces is hanging as a banner in Westminster Hall as part of a celebration of key moments in modern democracy.
If you look here in the top left-hand corner, this tells the story of my visiting the cinema. I've slightly amended it because in this version, I'm actually in the cinema having a right old laugh and pointing to the screen with my brother, sort of celebrating the fact that because of the Disability Discrimination Act, I managed to see Jaws.
Civil rights! Disabled people!
During the early 90s, disabled people decided enough was enough, and thousands took to the streets to protest in a series of demonstrations.
This is where a lot of the protests were.
One of those arrested at the time was Agnes Fletcher.
Can you paint me a picture of the day?
It was just incredibly exhilarating and exciting, seeing people in electric wheelchairs launching themselves into the road, handcuffing themselves to buses, bringing the whole of Whitehall to a standstill. And it was just an expression of people's frustration and anger.
You realise what you're doing here?
The demonstrations led to a general sense of outrage. Eventually, the Disability Discrimination Act was passed, a moment in time Agnes remembers vividly.
It was incredibly symbolic that finally this concept, this idea of discrimination against disabled people was recognised in law, so it all stems from there. And there have been massive changes since then over the 20 years as a result of that legal change.
Although the bill was weaker than many campaigners had hoped for, fundamentally it changed many things. For starters, it introduced the term reasonable adjustments. But did the law go far enough, and just how easy is it to use? Doug Paulley is no lawyer, but he successfully sued public transport providers, universities, shops, pubs, and even a court. It's safe to say Doug has fully utilised the Disability Discrimination Act, and he's written a guide to show others how to do it.
It's frustrating that it's not generally enforced or enforceable by disabled people because it's not got the mechanisms that would make it easy for disabled people to use. What's the point of it being there unless everybody who experiences discrimination can force change through it?
Despite its flaws, the bill was a remarkable moment in disability history. For those campaigners who worked tirelessly, it was a special time and a moment they were proud to be part of. In 2010, the Disability Discrimination Act fed into what is now known as the Equality Act, a law to protect everyone in Britain from unfair discrimination. But campaigners feel there are still many barriers to overcome and many fights still to have until full equality is achieved.
So there we go. Lots of interesting information there about pressure groups, really, because it was these pressure groups or public direct action, really, that led to the passing of the Disability Discrimination Act, and in so doing, the rights of the disabled, who are a persistent majority, were recognised. Up to that point, the Parliament could essentially ignore them because it was not a vote winner. If you put them all together, they were never going to represent a substantial majority because they were so distributed across the entire country. So there we see a very good example of the direct action working to protect a minority, a permanent, persistent minority against a majority. Excuse me. And also there we got a sneak preview of somebody using the courts and of the pressure groups using the courts to enhance accountability. The only problem with that is one that comes up all the time, and that in a democracy, political capital is equitably distributed, but pressure groups are not created equal. Now, in the case of the disabled activists, that's probably not a bad thing. It's a good thing that they were able to mobilise themselves to exploit their political capital and so achieve progressive change. However, if we look at other small minorities, like for example the arms trade, we can find that because of the distorted distribution of political capital, that it is possible for a minority to impose its will on a majority, where perhaps that's not really what most people want. And if you look there at the contrast between the ADS group, which is the Aerospace Defence and Security Group, and the campaign against the arms trade, we can see there how a persistent minority can undermine the will of the majority, perhaps to a deleterious, to the disadvantage, indeed, of all. Anyway, that's the last bit of real evidence that I'm going to give in this presentation, but that's the sort of stuff that you need to be coming up with. Plugging the gaps in the democratic process, we've talked about this in class. We know that democracy is a good thing. However, elections run to a schedule. What do you do between those schedules? Elections are based on topography, geography. You've got a geographically defined constituency. But of course, there are many political issues that are not confined by geography. So if I live in Oxfordshire, but I'm concerned about the coast, there's not very much I can do about that with my vote. If I live in Oxfordshire, but I'm interested in cycling in London, again, there's not very much I can do with my vote, but there might be things I can do through pressure groups. And of course, some people are excluded from the electoral process, those in prison, unless the EU has its way, and of course children. But you can still get involved with politics either through school or indeed through pressure groups. However, we come back to that idea that in a democracy, political capital is equitably distributed, but pressure groups are not created equal. And so to a certain extent, again, there's the potential for pressure groups to distort that process. Informing the debate, well, that makes perfect sense. We've got TV, radio, dead true press, and the internet, and of course pressure groups get involved in all aspects of these mediums. The problem, however, is that each pressure group is coming from a particular position. There's always going to be bias. So if a pressure group is telling you something, they're not going to give you a balanced debate. And at the same time, there's no interest in compromise or consensus. Now, of course, you can, of course, turn around and say that, well, of course, you know, for every pressure group, there's the alternative pressure group that will impose its, that will sort of balance out the debate. But of course, As we've discussed earlier, all pressure groups are not created equal. There's no interest in compromise or consensus, and some pressure groups can simply shout an awful lot louder than others. We can go back and look at the ADS and the CAT. They do encourage participation. It's an alternative to parties. We know that tribalism, tribal politics has broken down. No one is born a Tory or born a socialist anymore. And instead, people tend to pick and choose political policies that they like. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is perhaps something we can discuss in class. It also is so much easier to access this. And one thing I should encourage you to look at here is a website called 38 Degrees. It's incredibly helpful, and you should find it very, very useful. Have a look at that website, 38 Degrees, and you'll see what I mean by making pressure groups easier. And this does encourage people to get engaged in politics. And of course, a democracy is predicated on engagement and participation. On the other hand, of course, is that this perhaps can serve to undermine electoral politics. And there's also the rise of slacktivism, where people think they're getting involved in politics simply by clicking a web page, but that doesn't really equate to any effective or meaningful form of participation. And again, you can refer back to that great article from Politics Review for more details on that. And let's not forget that some activity can be positively anti-democratic. If you're disrupting normal life, if you're committing crimes, and we're thinking here of, yeah, okay, I'm going to say it, Fathers for Justice. Some activity is positively anti-democratic. This is why when we go to Parliament, we have to sit behind that glass. That's not a good thing. It doesn't encourage democracy, because these people just don't respect rules. And you can argue there's a fine line between criminal behaviour and civil disobedience, and some pressure groups perhaps transgress that particular line. Pressure groups also serve to enhance accountability. You can have specific campaigns against miscarriages of justice through direct actions and media campaigns, and of course through the courts. And here I'm looking at Client Earth, a very, very good pressure group on that front. But then again, sometimes you have to ask whether or not this is really serving the public interest. Is there an excessive amount of campaign? Does it get in the way? Are we pursuing individual interests rather as against the public good? And again, we come back to that idea of the distribution of capital. Are people really fighting battles that need to be fought, or are they just taking up time in the process and distorting the debate? And that's about it. Now, there's lots of information there that needs fleshing out, and that's where you guys are going to have to go out and do some research and get the evidence. And then when we come to class, we'll pull all of that together, and I look forward to discussing it with you there and then. All the best.